Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Pi Podcast. I'm your host, Irene. As usual, share, like, and subscribe. Today, we're going to answer the question: can I invest in AI? If so, how so? And if not, why not? So, to be able to understand AI, we need to understand the wider ecosystem within which it operates. And you may have heard of the S&P 500. So, this is essentially an index that lists the top 500 companies in the US. I would say the largest 500 companies in the US by market cap across a variation of different industries. So it's a good representation of the market. And if you think about the companies listed in the S&P 500 by the market capitalization, we understand that a third of that market cap is actually a representation of seven companies. And these are seven companies that exist within the technology space, which means that the other 490 plus companies represent two-thirds of the S&P 500 market cap. Now, that is quite significant, and it gives us like an idea of what the market actually looks like. The seven companies are called the Magnificent Seven, and these companies are Apple, Alphabet, which is Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, Nvidia, and Tesla. Now, the ecosystem for AI can be understood in three different ways. You've got the software, you've got the hardware, and you've also got the cloud computing. Now, these magnificent seven companies occupy these different pillars. Sometimes they occupy more than one pillar, sometimes they only occupy one pillar. You've also got other companies within the investment ecosystem that also are tech companies or sort of sit within these three pillars. So I'm going to mention them as we go along, just so that you might take the opportunity to look into them if you've not heard of them, and perhaps allow yourself the opportunity to decide whether or not it fits into your portfolio, into your investment strategy, into your investment thesis, and then just see if it's a good idea for you to have them in there. Before we proceed, I'd just like to say the biggest players in this market are the Americans and the Asians, the Chinese to be specific. And so I want us to have a bit of an open mindset that whenever you're thinking about investing in any of these companies, or whenever you're exploring these companies, I want us to explore it from the American perspective and from the Asian perspective, because as I've said, they're the two key players. So whatever's happening in the Americas is also happening in China or in one of the other Asian countries. And it's really important for us to be mindful of that as investors who are looking to maximize our returns and make the most of our portfolios, have that diversification as well in place from a geographical perspective. China and America tend to be the biggest players, as I've said, and this is because they're very good at coming up with the innovation and the production of these tools and capabilities. So let's speak about the different AI companies first that we could potentially recognize and that are more familiar to us. So we can speak of OpenAI, which is ChatGPT. We can speak of Llama, which is a Meta product, Gemini, which is a Google product, and you may also have heard of DeepSeek. More recently, there was some interesting news about it earlier in the year, which I will touch on later. And this is a Chinese equivalent of these companies. These are not the only companies, I'm not saying that. I'm just giving you an example of companies that you may be familiar with, but others exist. So the process we're going through today to understand their ecosystem is the same process that you should go through if there's other AI tools that you really appreciate, other AI companies. Go through the same process with them and understand their ecosystem and potentially how you can get exposure to the AI products in your portfolio. So, from the cloud computing perspective, let's think about it as a car, right? I'm going to use a car analogy. I mean, we've got Tesla in the Magnificent Seven, so that's a good way to sort of segue into this car analogy. If you think about a car, you've got the body of the car, you've got the engine of the car, and then you've also got the intelligence of the car. So that's like the electricals, the gearbox, everything that sort of sends instructions to allow the car to operate. That's exactly how the AI ecosystem works. You've got the cloud computing space, which is essentially the body of the car. This sort of stores your data information. You've then got the hardware, which is the engine, and then you've got the software, which is the intelligence that then enables everything to function. So if you think about the players in the cloud computing space, let's say with reference to ChatGPT, perhaps, you've got Microsoft Azure, Oracle Corporation, which more recently signed a $30 billion deal with OpenAI to be able to provide them cloud services. Think about Gemini, you've got Google Cloud. And on the Chinese side, if you're thinking about DeepSeek, we've also got Alibaba, which is a big player in the cloud computing space. Now, let's move on to the hardware. On the hardware side of it, the biggest player in here is NVIDIA. And NVIDIA is significant across both markets. The reason why DeepSeek was able to sort of exist is because they actually used an older version of NVIDIA to be able to build and model their AI from. And so we can see across the board that's a very key player to have. And it explains why NVIDIA's market valuation is quite significant. The other thing is this, right? So in the hardware space, as much as we've got NVIDIA as a key player, we've also got other companies coming in to build their own hardware, right? A market is always better when you've got competition. So Microsoft have their own version of the hardware. Amazon also have their own version that they're building out. We also hear of a company called SoftBank, and that's a Japanese conglomerate. They basically are investors in different companies, different industries. And so we're hearing that they also have some sort of footing when it comes to investing in companies that are also building the hardware side of it. And so that's a potential one to look out for. Alibaba is also another one that's looking into its own chips and semiconductors. And so the hardware space tends to sort of predominantly exist around chips and semiconductors. Now, if we move on to the software, we've also got a Microsoft product, GitHub, which is like the developers' playground, and they like to use that a lot for the work that they do. We've also got PyTorch by Meta, AWS by Amazon, and Alibaba again, as you can see on the DeepSeek side. So just to give you an overview of the players across cloud, hardware, and software, this is what you can see. And just to mention that on the hardware side, NVIDIA is the biggest player, and the rest are sort of trying to build, I guess, products that can compete with NVIDIA, or just to sort of widen the landscape a bit for the hardware products. So now that we've understood the ecosystem and the companies that play within that ecosystem, then it's also good for us to now figure out whether or not these companies are companies that we want to have in our portfolio. Because if you want to have exposure to the AI stocks, then these are the companies that you potentially want to be looking into. Now, it's not the day-to-day investor who's going to invest in the OpenAI companies because they're looking for big ticket sizes. So unless you're somebody who's got a lot of cash stashed away somewhere, then it becomes very challenging for you to be a stakeholder in these companies. And so I would say the best way for you to get exposure to them is to invest in these technology companies. So there are other companies that sort of play around in this space as well. It's not just the Magnificent Seven. The Magnificent Seven are key players for sure, but there's other companies that exist within this space that would be potentially good for you to be aware of as well. So we've already spoken about Oracle having a recent deal with OpenAI. That's pretty big. We've got the conglomerate SoftBank, which again is rumored to be one of those that's going to be a partner similar to Microsoft with ChatGPT. Now, we're hearing that potentially the employees of OpenAI are going to be in a position to sort of sell their stocks, and they're going to be selling the stocks to SoftBank. And so SoftBank is also one of those companies as well, which is looking at the hardware space as well to be a semiconductor sort of like a chip manufacturing company, or maybe own companies that manufacture chips or have a stake in companies that manufacture chips. I keep seeing SoftBank coming up, and the reason for that is because, as I've said, it's a conglomerate, which means it sort of plays around different spaces, and it's no surprise that they're also getting involved in the tech and AI space. So that's another company that you might want to look into. So we've also spoken about the Americas and we've spoken about China. And I want us to do like a quick comparison here so we can fully understand why what's important in America or what's important in China is important to the rest of the world, is important to our personal portfolios and our journey in wealth creation. In the West, we use Google. That's one of the main search engines that we have. In China, they use Baidu. So you want to understand how can you invest in the Baidu stocks, right? In the West, we are a fan of Meta. We use Facebook. We use Instagram. We also use WhatsApp. These are all powered by Meta. In China, they have what we call WeChat, and that's powered by a company called Tencent. So, again, is it potentially one you want to sort of look into a little bit further and see whether it's suitable for your portfolio? That's absolutely for you to decide. We can then move into talking about the other companies, right? So, we've talked about Apple, which sits in there. And Apple, again, we're talking about, products that we tend to use on a daily basis. So, like you've got the Apple Cloud, you've got, the iPhotos, so these are all, occupying the tech space in a very big way. You've got your tablets, you've got your MacBooks, um, and then you've also got your Androids. So you're either like, an Apple or an Android person. And Android, on the other hand, is like a Google sort of product. And they essentially, I think Android actually operates on 70% of um, phones out there. So if you want to get a piece of that cake, then definitely you're one who's potentially looking to invest through Google, and then you can get your access to the Android shares as well. So the next thing that we're going to move to is the EV space. So we've got Tesla, and it's part of the Magnificent Seven. So let's just understand why Tesla is also an important player in this game. In America, Tesla is the leader. In Asia, specifically China, you've got a company called BYD, which is Build Your Dreams. I actually love that. So, BYD is a significant player in this space. They are producing EVs. They're in direct competition with Tesla. And so, they're also, as much as they're sort of consumer products, they are heavily in the tech space and also building the AI. So, when we speak about AI in this sense, we're saying that these are going to be self-driving cars, which are going to sort of maneuver the way to your destination without you having to tell it how to get there. You just need to put your address in and off you go, right? So thinking about how you can be an investor, I think would be something that's worth considering for your portfolio. So we've also got other companies that on the Chinese side as well that are sort of within the space. So the biggest one that we know is TikTok. But the company that is behind TikTok is a private company. So if you can't invest in TikTok directly, how can you get exposure to it? TikTok is owned by ByteDance, right? And companies that are sort of partners or having are investors in ByteDance include SoftBank. And then we've also got a different company called KKR, which is a private equity slash real estate company. And they're also an investor in ByteDance, and they're also a listed company. So these are some of the other companies that you can look at within this space that will give you exposure to the different tech and AI tools and the ecosystem that then allows you to have exposure to this in your portfolio, because a lot of the AI stocks at this point in time are not listed. So, when we speak about investing, I always like to speak to you guys about the risk involved in this. So, with the AI and tech space, I'd said earlier that I was going to touch on the news from earlier on this year with regards to DeepSeek and OpenAI. Um, we understand that the Chinese company that was behind DeepSeek managed to train their AI and build the whole product with at least $6 million. So that is a significantly low price in comparison to what the investors had thought. So Nvidia is a company that produces the hardware. It's the biggest player, as you already said, and ChatGPT also used Nvidia to be able to build its product. But now NVIDIA has valuations in the trillions. Their hardware is crucial to a lot of the tech and AI that's out here. And so a lot of companies have a stake in NVIDIA. Now, because DeepSeek was able to use an older version of the NVIDIA hardware to build their AI tool, investors got into a bit of a panic. And they were kind of questioning, does that mean we're then about to see a whole new wave of competitors coming in, because you're saying you were able to do this at such low price in comparison to what we expected? Are we also saying that Nvidia is overvalued? Um, what are we saying about this space? Like, what is this signaling? So the market got into a bit of a panic, and Nvidia actually lost $600 billion roughly in one day. Now, for many companies, that would wipe them out, but because Nvidia is quite a huge company in terms of its valuation, then they've still managed to survive and to sort of proceed. So when I speak about the risks, this is what I mean. The volatility with these stocks is quite high. The market is also very fickle. And it means it's for individuals who are looking to have long term investments. Because if you look at it in the short term, and if you're an investor who's thinking, like, if you were caught up in that whole uh, deep seek sort of arrival and you got into a panic, you may have sold your stocks. But actually, since then, the stock price has gone up again. And so, would you then be buying it at a higher price, or would you just have preferred that you cashed out and then, look into something more general or just invest in the index as a whole? The other thing I would say is because these are growth stocks, right? These companies are still sort of growing quite rapidly. I would say that in terms of the valuation, are we sure that they're valued correctly? We don't really know where AI is going. We don't know what the future looks like. There's a whole lot of unknowns within this space. And so it becomes a space that, any bit of information can change the trajectory of, the valuation or what the analysts think and the value of the stock and the portfolio. So it's also something to be very mindful of. So one last thing I would also love to touch on is the Alibaba and Amazon. So we've already spoken about them. Amazon is sort of within the hardware space as well. And Alibaba, we've seen, is running across the three different pillars. Aside from that, I just want to point out that these are also e commerce giants. And so, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, is that tech companies are now having to put AI into their strategies. So it's really becoming part and parcel of their businesses. They're embedding it into what they do because the AI system is also evolving. Amazon has also got AI products such as Alexa as well. So we can see that they're also trying to maintain their relevance and grow in this space as well. So I think they're absolutely exceptional in terms of what they do, being e-commerce giants, also trying to be relevant in the hardware and the AI space as well. So I hope that's been insightful for you guys in terms of learning about how you can invest in tech and how you can get exposure to AI. Don't say that you can't invest in AI because there isn't really a way you can directly invest without being a big ticket holder. What you are doing is getting exposure to AI companies through your stock investments in tech companies. Now, as usual, seek financial advice, make sure this style of investing works with your portfolio, and then proceed to make the choices that are well suited to your investment thesis. So, thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.